So remember, we've talked about the different API methods, the standards, looked at the get, the post requests. For this one, I'll just give you a quick run through of how you think about acceptance criteria of an API endpoint. So this is mostly in the context of backend, right? So you're talking with the backend developer and you tell him how the tech spec requires him to build an API, maybe or a Jira task requires him to build an API or an endpoint for the user to submit for the front end to submit a particular request, to make a particular request to. Now, if your company adheres to structure well, the tech spec would have contained the method required, the URL, and the headers that will be passed for it to pass. And as a product manager or a QA, if you're a quality assurance person, in order to validate that this backend has been done, or if you're in a position in which the front end is telling you that it doesn't work, and you want to confirm that it really works, right? So you're looking at so you're taking of it around the API acceptance criteria or API testing. How do you test the API? Truth is, as of now, you already know how to test an API. If you don't already know this, like you already know how to test an API. You can try to use code to write it, to test it, but more often than not, you'll be using POSTMAN to actually test it. So let's create a scenario in which the URL is given. As you can see on my screen here, the URL has been given, similar to what we use in the practice test. And the backend developer is supposed to create an endpoint using this URL with a method, a get method. The headers to be passed have been provided. And this is the expected response in this format, exactly this format. What you want to do is to make some set of points that the backend will follow, that when I make certain requests, certain get requests to fetch user details, I must get this response. When I make requests to get user posts, I must get this response. When I make a request to get user back account, I must get this response. So in this case, it's the front end that is making most of these requests, right? So when the front end makes a request to get each of these, to do each of these endpoints with each of these properties, a particular response is expected. Now the developer tells you, I'm done with this, I'm done with it, I've completed it, and you want to test it on staging, or your staging URL. We'll talk about deploying later, but you want to test it on staging URL. You open your Postman basically, put in the URL here, as you've already seen, select the appropriate method, type in the headers, key and value pair of the headers. You might need to make some configurations to this. You can talk to your developer to guide you on setting some of the headers in case there are additional values you need to set. But usually it's just a simple key and value. You might need to set an authorization header. I did not really talk about that here. Your developer will guide you around this, or the technical document will guide you around this. And when you are done, you make a request. And the response you get must be exactly the response you've told the back, or the rest must be exactly the response the front-end engineer is expecting, or the technical spec say that you are going to get. So like, you actually tested the API using Postman. Some places I've worked in the past, many of the QA engineers or the product managers actually use Postman in this format. And before a task is checked as done, they go and use Postman to make a request to all the backend endpoints required for the backend dev to make for this task. And they compare the result of those outcomes and say, okay, does this match with what was expected? Another way that some product managers do it is they combine the application. If it's a mobile app, they combine the application with using Postman, right? So you add money to you top up your account using the application. If you have an Android app in your company, then use Postman to make a request to that endpoint, and you should get the details back as it should be, trying out different experiments. So that's what you just have to think about API testing and acceptance criteria, right? The tool you'll be using the most is most likely going to be Postman for this. All you need to really know is the method, which is the get, post, put, delete, the URL, and the body, and the expected return value for the different URLs. And next video, I'll bring someone on board just to have fun with it and look at it with a product requirement document and just see from a product manager perspective. I know you've learned a lot on this already. You've seen a lot of perspective, but let's just see a product manager talk around it with an application in mind. See you then. Bye.